The sound of a man laughing can hide the sound of a knife being sharpened. Vera Moss had learned that truth the way most people learn the things that matter, quietly, over years, without anyone noticing she was paying attention. She had worked the floor of Caruso's for 6 years. 6 years of refilling water glasses and carrying plates she couldn't afford to eat from. 6 years of nodding at conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. 6 years of making herself small in a room full of people who took up too much space. The restaurant sat on the 42nd floor of a building in the heart of Chicago's financial district, all dark mahogany paneling and candlelight that cost more per table than her monthly grocery bill. The kind of place where the menu had no prices. The kind of place where the guests assumed the staff were furniture. Vera knew she was easy to overlook. She had made peace with that a long time ago. Or at least she had told herself she had. She was 31 years old, curvy, in all the ways that certain rooms had always made her feel she shouldn't be, with dark eyes that missed nothing and a smile she had trained to stay pleasant, no matter what she was actually thinking. She wore the standard black uniform, kept her hair pulled back, moved through the dining room like water moving around stone. Efficient, invisible, safe. That was the word she always came back to. Safe. The management at Caruso's had a rule, unspoken, but understood by every person who worked the floor. You did not acknowledge what you heard at the tables. You did not react. You did not remember. The clientele was a specific kind of powerful, the kind whose names showed up in newspapers without the full story ever being told. And discretion wasn't a courtesy. It was a survival skill. Vera had always been good at survival. She noticed Callum Varro the first night he came in, 3 years ago. She would have been hard-pressed to explain exactly why. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. In fact, he was almost never the loudest man in any room, which she had come to understand was a choice, not a limitation. He was somewhere in his early 40s, with the kind of face that had been weathered into something severe and interesting, dark hair going grey at the temples, and eyes the color of a winter lake, cold and perfectly still on the surface, and God only knew what moved underneath. He wore suits the way other men wore armor. He sat with his back to the wall at every table, without fail, always facing the door. She noticed that immediately. The door watching, the stillness. She had worked enough years at Caruso's to know what that kind of stillness meant. His full name was Callum Varro, though she had only heard it spoken out loud in whispers, the way people spoke about weather systems and natural disasters, with a kind of awed wariness, as if saying the name too clearly might summon something. In certain circles, he was known simply as Varro. In the downtown offices of several legitimate real estate and import firms, he was the majority stakeholder and silent chairman. In the parts of Chicago that didn't show up on tourist maps, he was something else entirely. What he was to Vera, for 3 years, was Table 14. Table 14 wanted still water, not sparkling. He preferred the dry-aged ribeye, no sauce, and when he ordered wine, he always deferred to the sommelier's recommendation without pretending to deliberate over the list. A small thing that she had noticed immediately, because it meant he wasn't performing. He tipped 30%, always in cash, always exact. He never snapped his fingers. He never looked through her like she wasn't there. That last part had undone her more than she liked to admit. In 6 years of working a floor full of men who treated waitstaff like expensive appliances, Callum Varro was the only one who had ever said thank you and meant it, not the automatic, distracted thank you of someone who had been taught manners, the real kind, the kind that came with eye contact. She was not so foolish as to make anything of it. She understood the geography of the world she moved through. She was a waitress. He was whatever Callum Varro was, and the distance between those 2 points was not the kind that collapsed over dinner service. She had her notebook of observations, and her quiet pride in doing her job flawlessly, and the small, carefully managed fact of caring about a man she had no business caring about. And that was the full extent of it, or so she had believed, until the Thursday in November, when everything changed. The reservation had come in under a corporate name, as they often did when Varro dined at Caruso's. Vera had seen his name on the evening's sheet, and had done what she always did, nothing outwardly. She had set the table herself. She had made sure the water was still, the right temperature, no ice. He arrived at 8, which was his habit. He was not alone, which was also not unusual. What was unusual was the woman on his arm. Her name, Vera would learn, was Sloane Whitfield. She was tall and angular, and dressed in the way that required significant expenditure to appear effortless. Champagne silk, jewelry that caught the light without demanding attention, hair the color of expensive caramel. She was beautiful in a practiced way, the beauty of someone who understood it as a resource and managed it accordingly. She laughed at everything, Varro said, and touched his arm at measured intervals and looked around the room with the careful assessment of a woman who was calculating her position in it. Vera noticed all of this the way she noticed everything. She took their order. She refilled the water. She disappeared back into the rhythm of the floor. The restaurant filled around them. By 9 o'clock, Caruso's was at capacity. Business dinners and anniversary celebrations, and the particular kind of transaction that dressed itself up as a social occasion. The noise level rose to the pleasant roar that the management aimed for, that specific frequency of clinking glass and murmured conversation that made it easy to talk without being heard. Easy, unless you were Vera, who had spent 6 years learning how sound moved in this room. She was setting a dessert course at the table beside 14 when she caught the first fragment. She would not have caught it at all, except that she had been reaching across to adjust sensitivity, and the angle of the room's acoustics had done something peculiar, folded 2 conversations into one. The East Warehouse, Thursday 11. She did not react. She straightened the centerpiece and moved away. But her mind had already caught the thread, the way it always did when something felt wrong. She circled back to the service station near the kitchen pass and let herself process what she had heard, not the words themselves. She had heard plenty of things at Caruso's that she had trained herself not to process. It was the voice. The voice had not been Varro's. It had been Sloane's. Vera stood at the service station for exactly 4 seconds before she moved again, drifting back toward the far end of the room with a pitcher of water that nobody had asked for yet. She took the long route, the one that curved along the wall near the curtained alcove, and she let herself listen. Confirmed for Thursday. The number he gave you. I know the number. He needs it clean. No loose ends after. A pause, the sound of a wine glass being set down. There won't be. Vera kept moving. Her face was the same as it always was, pleasant, composed, professionally absent. Her hands were steady. The pitcher was steady. Inside, something had gone very cold. She understood what she had heard. She did not want to understand it, but she was 31 years old, and she had worked 6 years in a room where powerful men made decisions over dinner. And she was not stupid, and she had never been stupid, and she understood exactly what she had heard. Someone had arranged something for Thursday, at a warehouse on the east side. Something that was meant to end cleanly. Something that was supposed to leave no loose ends. And Sloane Whitfield, who was sitting at table 14 with her practiced smile and her champagne silk, had just confirmed it. Vera went to the kitchen. She set the water pitcher on the counter and stood there for a moment, looking at the stainless steel surface at her own distorted reflection in it. She thought about the rule, the unspoken, universally understood rule of Caruso's. You did not acknowledge what you heard. You did not react. You did not remember. She thought about 6 years of keeping herself safe. She thought about the way Callum Varro said thank you and meant it. Her hands moved before she had fully decided anything. She found the small order pad she kept tucked in her apron, the one she used for table notes, for allergy flags and special requests, and she tore a clean sheet from the back. She pressed it flat against the counter. She picked up her pen. She wrote 4 words. She folded the paper twice. Then she walked back out onto the floor. The next 20 minutes were the longest of her life. She moved through her tables on autopilot, her body performing the precise choreography of the job, while her mind ran the same loop over and over. What she had heard, what it meant, what she was about to do, whether she was wrong, whether she was right, whether it mattered which one she was. At 9:20, she came to table 14 to clear the main course. Sloane was speaking. Something about a gallery opening. Her voice bright and social, the performance of a woman who was very good at performing. Varro was listening with the particular quality of attention he always brought to everything. The stillness that she had always misread as indifference and had slowly come to understand was something else entirely. He was watching Sloane with his Winterlake eyes, and there was something in his expression that Vera could not quite name. Something careful, something that had not been there the last time she had seen him. She cleared the plates. She set down the dessert menus, and when she placed the small leather check presenter on the edge of the table, the one that held the wine list and the after-dinner card, she set it down on Varro's side, and inside it, folded twice, was the note. She did not look at him when she did it. She thanked them both for their patience and moved away. She did not breathe normally for the next 4 minutes. When she came back to the table, the check presenter was open. The note was gone, and Callum Varro was looking at her across the length of the dining room with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something that broke through the stillness, something that was not cold at all. She looked away immediately and went back to the kitchen. She did not see what happened next, because she spent the rest of her shift in the kitchen, finding reasons to stay there. She heard, at some point, the sound of chairs moving. She heard Varro's voice, low and controlled, say something she couldn't make out. She heard Sloane's voice begin a question, and then stop. Just stop. At 11:15, one of the other servers came into the kitchen and said, quietly, that table 14 had settled their bill and left, and that the table needed resetting. Vera nodded. She went out and reset the table. Her hands were steady the whole time. She told herself she had done what she could do. She told herself it was over. She took the train home at midnight and sat in her apartment and stared at the wall and told herself both of those things until she almost believed them. She did not hear from Callum Varro for 11 days. She had not expected to hear from him at all. She had played every version of it in her head during those 11 days. The version where she had been wrong about what she heard. The version where she had been right and it hadn't mattered. The version where something had gone wrong on Thursday and she had not done enough. The version where she had done too much and had put a target on herself without knowing it. She was not sleeping well. She was eating lunch at her desk and going to work and coming home and running the same loops in her mind until she was exhausted by the effort of being afraid. On the 11th day, there was a car outside her apartment building. It was a black town car, which in most contexts would not merit a second glance. In the context of Vera's street at 7 in the morning, with a driver who got out when he saw her and addressed her by name, it merited significant attention. "Miss Moss," the driver said. He was polite and impeccably dressed and gave nothing away. "Mr. Varro would like a word if you're available." Vera stood on her front step for a moment. She thought about the 11 days. She thought about her options, which were genuinely limited, given that the alternative to getting into the car was running, and she had nowhere to run and no particular aptitude for it. She got into the car. Varro was waiting in an office on the 28th floor of a building that did not advertise its occupants on the lobby directory. The office was spare and expensive in the way that serious money tended to be. Clean lines, no excess. A view of the city that was frankly absurd. He was standing at the window when she was brought in, his back to her. And for a moment, she had the strange and vertiginous feeling of being in a story she did not know the ending to. He turned around. The Winterlake eyes were the same. The stillness was the same, but there was something different in the way he was looking at her, something she didn't have a category for yet. "Sit down, Miss Moss," he said. "Please." She sat. She kept her hands folded in her lap, and her back straight, and her face as composed as she could manage, which was fairly composed because she had been practicing this exact expression for 6 years. He sat across from her. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking, which was, she was learning, a thing he did when he was deciding something. "I want to know," he said finally, "how you knew." She considered lying. She was, in most circumstances, a competent liar. Not because she was dishonest by nature, but because she had learned early that the truth was a resource you spent carefully. But she looked at Callum Varro across the clean lines of his desks and understood with some certainty that lying to this man would be both futile and unwise. "I heard her," Vera said. "I hear everything in that room. Most of it I forget on purpose." She paused. "That I couldn't." He was quiet for a moment. "You took a significant risk." "I know. You had no way of knowing how I would respond to that note." "No," she agreed. "I didn't. Then why?" She thought about the question seriously because it deserved serious thought. She had asked herself the same thing 11 times in 11 days and had not arrived at an answer that satisfied her until this moment, sitting across from him, looking at the face of a man who was still alive, because she had torn a page from an order pad. "Because you never treated me like I wasn't there," she said, and I couldn't pretend I hadn't heard. Varro looked at her for a long time. The note said, "She's having you killed. Thursday. East Warehouse." "Don't go," he said it flatly, like he was reading a document. Vera did not react, because there was nothing to react to. Those were her exact words, all 4 phrases, and hearing them, spoken out loud by his voice in this room, was surreal in a way she could not entirely account for. Thursday came and went, he said. She had known that. She had watched the news that Friday morning with her heart in her throat, and found nothing. No warehouse fire, no reported incident, nothing. She had told herself that meant it had been handled. She had tried not to think about what handled meant. "What I want to know," Varro said, leaning forward slightly, his forearms resting on the desk, "is whether you understood what you were doing when you put that note in the check presenter." "I understood some of it," she said honestly. "And the rest? I thought I'd work it out later." Something moved across his face. It was not quite a smile. It was something more restrained than that, something she suspected he did not produce often or carelessly. "You work it out often that way? Commit first, think second?" "Only when there's no time for the other order," Vera said. He was quiet again. She had stopped being afraid of his silences by this point. They were becoming familiar, the particular rhythm of a man who did not fill space with noise just because the space existed. "Sloane Whitfield," he said, and his voice shifted. "Nothing dramatic, just a degree of flattening, the way a lake goes glassy before a storm. Her brother had a debt, a considerable one, with people who do not extend patience as a matter of policy. She was offered a choice." Vera waited. "She chose," he said simply. There was nothing else to add to that, and he did not add anything. The choice Sloane had made and the arithmetic of it were complete in those 2 words, and Vera understood the entire equation without needing it spelled out. "I'm sorry," she said. She meant it, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was apologizing for. For the fact of the betrayal, maybe. For the specific cruelty of it coming from that direction. Varro looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. "Why are you sorry? Because it was someone you trusted." He was quiet for 3 seconds. "I'm beginning to think my instincts about trust have required recalibration." It was a strange thing to say, and he said it while looking directly at her, and Vera felt the back of her neck go warm in a way that she firmly declined to acknowledge. She looked at her hands in her lap and reminded herself of the geography of the world she moved through. Is there something you need from me? She asked. Regarding what I heard, or I haven't said anything to anyone, if that's what you're. I know you haven't, he said. She looked up. How? Because you're still here, he said simply. If you'd talked, you wouldn't be. He paused, as if recognizing how that had sounded. I don't mean that as a threat, Miss Moss. I mean it as a statement of how I know your character. That's a very specific way to assess character. I have a limited portfolio of methods. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Outside, the city sprawled under a grey November sky. And somewhere in this building were men who did not know she existed. And somewhere across town was whatever remained of Sloane Whitfield's calculus, and Vera Moss was sitting in a chair on the 28th floor, having what might have been the most important conversation of her life. What happens now? She asked. That, Varro said, depends on you. She waited. You can walk out of here, go back to Caruso's, and nothing about your life changes, he said. You have my word on that, and I am told my word is one of the few things about me that is unambiguously reliable. A beat. Or, Vera said. You consider a different arrangement. He seemed to choose his next words with care. I need someone in my organization with your particular skill set. My skill set, she said. Being invisible, being perceptive, he said. Which is not the same thing, though I recognize it has often been made to feel that way. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 6 years of making herself small. She thought about the 4 words she had written on an order pad at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, when she could have kept walking and chosen safe. She thought about the fact that she had not chosen safe, and that she was not entirely sure she wanted to anymore. What kind of arrangement? She said carefully. Are we talking about? What followed was the strangest negotiation of her life. He was direct about what he needed. Someone with exceptional observational skills. Someone who could move through rooms without attracting attention. Someone whose judgment he had already seen demonstrated under pressure. He was equally direct about what it would cost her, in terms of the world she would be stepping into, and he did not soften any of that. She appreciated the directness more than she expected to. She told him she would think about it. He told her that was reasonable. She was in the elevator, going down, when her phone buzzed. A message from a number she didn't recognize, containing only a phone number, and, when you decide. She stared at the message for the length of the elevator ride. Then she put her phone away. She thought about it for 3 days. She went to work and refilled water glasses and made herself invisible, and thought about what it meant that invisibility, which she had always experienced as a deficit, might actually be something worth something to someone. She thought about Sloane Whitfield and the choice she had made, and the geometry of what happened when trust was treated as a transaction. She thought about the way Varro had looked at her across the desk, not through her, not past her, but at her, with the full and particular attention of a man who saw exactly what was in front of him. She thought about the 4 words on a folded piece of paper. Don't go. I heard. She thought about how the most important things she had ever done had started with not staying quiet when quiet would have been easier. On the 3rd day, she called the number. He answered on the 2nd ring. Mrs. Moss. One condition, she said, a pause. Name it. I stay sharp, she said. Whatever this is, whatever you need me to do, I stay the person who makes her own calls, not the person who makes yours. Silence on the line. She had the impression of a man recalibrating. Agreed, Varro said. She exhaled. Then we can talk. The first 6 months were an education unlike any she could have predicted. She was not, as she had initially assumed, going to be placed back into the role of background presence. Not exactly, though her perceptual skills remained her primary function. Instead, she worked adjacent to his operations, attending the meetings that required a second set of eyes, reading the rooms that he couldn't read from his own position at the center of them. She was good at it in ways that still surprised her, and she could tell, watching Varro's face in those early weeks, that he was being consistently surprised by the precision of what she brought back to him. He had known she was perceptive. He had not known the extent of it. She had not known it either, as it turned out. She had spent so long minimizing herself that she had not understood what she was actually doing with the observations she collected. What they were worth, what they could build. Having someone treat her perceptiveness as the central thing, rather than an incidental feature of an otherwise unremarkable person, was an experience she did not have a clean frame for. She went home at the end of those early weeks, feeling something she finally identified. With some astonishment, as competent, not just able. Actually, specifically, undeniably good at something. Varro was not an easy man to work for. He was demanding in the way of someone who had extremely high standards and very little interest in explaining them repeatedly. He was also, she discovered, completely consistent. What he said he meant. What he promised he kept. What he decided was decided. In a world she had always understood to be defined by shifting surfaces and concealed intentions, his consistency was so unusual as to be almost disorienting. He never treated her like she wasn't there. He also, and this took her longer to see, because she was not in the habit of looking for it, went out of his way to ensure she was safe. Not in a suffocating way, not in a way that presumed she needed protection more than competence, but the arrangements around her work were always such that she was never exposed unnecessarily, never left without exit options, never placed in a position where her safety was incidental to the objective. She noticed this the way she noticed everything. She did not comment on it for a long time. In the 7th month, she noticed something else. They were at a private dinner, the kind that didn't show up on calendars, at a house in a suburb that existed, as far as Vera could tell, purely as a neutral meeting ground. She was there in her customary role, the observer at the edge of the room, the one taking in the texture of conversations without being part of them. Varro was across the room, conducting the meeting with his usual contained authority. At some point, she caught him looking at her, not the checking look of someone tracking an asset in the room. Something different. Something that, when she met it by accident, he did not immediately redirect. She looked away. She made a note on her internal pad and said nothing, and went home and stared at the ceiling for an hour. This happened again, and then again. And then, on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday in the 6th month of her first year, he said, at the end of a working dinner that had run past midnight, "You should eat something, Vera." It was the first time he had used her given name. She looked up from the file she was reviewing. He was looking at her with the expression she still didn't quite have a word for, the one that was not cold, the one that had broken through the stillness the night she had set the note in the check presenter and looked away. "I'm fine," she said. "You've been working for 6 hours without stopping. So have you. I'm considerably less interesting to me than you are." The room was very quiet. She held very still. "That," she said after a moment, "is a very specific thing to say." "I've been told I'm specific," he said. She looked at him across the table, covered in files, and the remains of a working dinner, and the accumulated evidence of 6 months of learning each other in the sideways manner of two people who were both, for different reasons, more comfortable with indirection than with anything straightforwardly stated. "Callum," she said. He waited. "I need you to understand that if you're saying what I think you're saying." She stopped, started again. "I am not easy. I am not low maintenance. I have opinions about everything and I keep score. And I spent 6 years making myself invisible, because I believed that was the safer choice, and I am still working out what to do with the fact that it wasn't." She looked at him steadily. "I am not a project. I know that," he said. He said it with the particular flatness of a man, stating a fact he considered beyond dispute. "I'm not interested in projects. Then, what are you interested in?" He was quiet for a moment, with the quality of quiet that she had long since learned to read as serious rather than evasive. "You wrote 4 words on a piece of paper. Because you couldn't stay silent when it would have been safer to. You sat across from me in this office 11 days later and told me the truth without flinching. His voice was even, deliberate. I've been interested in you since the first night you reset table 14. I've spent 2 years not saying it because I was aware of the imbalance, and I've spent 6 months realizing that imbalance has corrected itself considerably. She held his gaze. Has it? You argued me out of a tactical decision last Tuesday, and you were right, he said. The imbalance is entirely in your favor at this point. She felt something loosen in her chest. Something she hadn't known was pulled tight. I still think you're too quiet at breakfast, she said, which was not at all what she had planned to say. But she had learned by now that the most honest things came out sideways. Callum Varro almost smiled. It was the closest she had seen him come to it, unguarded, when he wasn't choosing to deploy it. I could be less quiet, he said, if that would help. It might, she said. It might help considerably. He reached across the table and turned over the file she had been reviewing, face down, signaling without words that the working portion of the evening was over. He looked at her across the quiet table. Dinner, he said. Not a working dinner. Friday, she said. The room felt different after that. She couldn't have explained how, exactly. Nothing visible had changed. The files were still there. The city was still outside the windows doing its city things. But something had settled, the way a room settles after a door finally closes that has been left open too long. She went home that night and stood in her kitchen and made tea and thought about 6 years of keeping herself safe and small. She thought about the night she had stood at a stainless steel counter with a folded piece of paper and made a decision without knowing where it would take her. She thought about the 4 words she had written. She knew them without thinking now, had known them for months the way you know the words to a song that's become part of you. Don't go. She knows. She had been wrong, she thought, about what safety was. She had understood it as smallness, as invisibility, as the careful management of her own edges, so as not to take up space that hadn't been offered. She had thought staying quiet was the same as staying intact. It wasn't. She understood that now in a way that went past words. The woman who had written that note at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night. The one who had been afraid and done it anyway. Who had committed before she had thought it all the way through. She was the truest version of Vera Moss there had been in a long time. Not the one who made herself small, the one who could not stay silent. That woman had gotten into a car, had told the truth across a desk, had shown up every day for 6 months and done her work with the full weight of herself, not the managed portion she had always kept in reserve. That woman, she thought, standing in her kitchen with a cup of tea going cold in her hands, was not invisible anymore. She was, at long last, entirely visible, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she was not afraid of being seen.